Well, hello, language facilitators, and g'day, mate, from Marcy at wavesofcommunication.com. I'm here today with another episode for my Language Facilitation Helpline podcast and Waves of Communication YouTube channel. And today I am talking about the lessons that I learned on my trip to Australia. So, if you haven't been following me or you're new to the channel, I'm just going to fill you in. Over the past couple of weeks, I spent 2 weeks in Australia, and then I've had a week in between. Thank you for being patient with me, all of my followers, um, because I've been recovering from this trip. It was life changing. I have never seen progress like I did when I visited these families. Now, there were a lot of lessons that we learned in the process. As a matter of fact, even our best laid plans kind of went out the window and new things came up and better experiences happened because we just abandoned any kind of structured situation and went naturally with what was occurring in these families' lives. And so what I'm going to be doing today is I've got 8 lessons. I made a bunch of notes about what I learned from this experience. So I think that there are people that can relate, not just the parents who are in Australia, but parents all over the world can relate to what I learned about systemic situations for late talkers and their families in Australia. And I also learned about how parents are navigating those systems. And when I worked with these families, I learned what really works, what people really need as far as coaching to see this rapid kind of progress. And we also learned what doesn't work, what parents had been trying and wasn't working. So I've got a lot here to explain to you. And before I do that, I just want to extend a note of gratitude. This is Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving week here in the United States, and I personally am feeling a ton of gratitude for not just my followers, all of you out there, a ton of gratitude for you for being patient as I evolve the platform, but also for the people who allowed me to come into their home. I know they saw it as a privilege, so did I. And I want to thank my staff. Christina and Summer, you are out there keeping the waves of communication waves flowing, the ship moving, while I'm able to travel and learn more about things to bring back new information to share with everybody here. So I am full of gratitude and appreciation for everybody. And in that spirit, I really want to share with all of you what I learned because my platform is changing as always. I just evolve with the system and helping you navigate what's going on, just like I did these parents in Australia. And because they trusted themselves and they trusted this process, that's how they saw the most improvement. So, hello to all of you who are watching. Thank you for watching. Let's get into what I learned. So, the first thing that I learned here, specifically about Australia, but also when I compare my experience in Australia with families other places, is this that Australia has many fewer people than the United States, certainly, and most other countries, actually, even smaller countries. Australia doesn't have very many people. So having a big variety of social services is not something that's able within the structure of the country. And still, even though there are fewer people, the percentage of children who are being diagnosed with autism is at least as high, if not higher, in Australia than other places. And it's because the system in Australia is limited in what they can offer. And so what they're doing is they're funneling all of these late talking kids into the same system, the one small limited system that they have. And how they're doing it is through this pressure to diagnose and things like that, because like we see, there are not as many options for goods and services as there are in the USA and other countries. And what I noticed is that the systemic trends in Australia, both from the marketing standpoint and the actual intervention strategies that people are hearing from professionals that are licensed in Australia, are 3 to 4 years behind what I have seen coming out through the systems in the United States. And what this delay means, what this sort of catch up means, is that in Australia, there still is a lot of pressure to utilize the money in the system to throw that money at a diagnosis, which means that you've got to get this autism diagnosis. There is nothing else you can do. In fact, you've got to try to get the most severe diagnosis you can for your child in order to get the money that is required to pay to these schools, systems, things that are going on, because they're pigeonholed, they're separated. What they're doing is they're segregating these kids because there are fewer of them, excuse me, than we have in the United States, but the percentage is still high. And the school systems are seeing a significant percentage of children that they're not able to integrate them into the classrooms, so they're developing alternative classrooms and alternative schools. And this was starting 3 to 4 years ago in the United States. So if you pre-pandemic were looking for any kind of services for your child, that was the route you took. You couldn't get any services without these kind of diagnoses because even the healthcare insurances weren't paying for them. And it's still true in the United States, depending on where you live and depending on what's offered. In the United States, there are more alternative methods that are offering. You'll see Gestalt language training that's happening for speech therapists here in the United States. That's not happening elsewhere. So even the therapists that are in the schools who figured out 3 to 4 years ago that these exchange-based, it was all ABA, PECS, picture systems, every kid was given a book, and then after the books, the tablets came, and I'm not even seeing the tablets come yet in Australia. It's all the same old stuff that we've seen in the United States. And while in Australia, the parents, they found me and they're looking online for alternatives, and they just don't have these things available. They cannot find a therapist anywhere who does anything besides these picture systems, because again, that's what they did. In order to get the money and use the money for your therapy, you had to use these ABA and exchange-based things. So this other lesson that I learned in Australia is that they're behind on what's happening and necessary for kids to develop, and parents are looking for alternatives. And so here is something else that I learned about the Australian government that was a benefit to the parents that I worked with. So the Australian government supports families by normalizing the practice of giving adults time off work, parents time off work when the children are off school, because I believe in Australia they just don't have enough childcare to be able to help those kids be safe while their parents are working. And so they give the parents and the kids time off, and the parents and the kids take time off. They do. They go on, get a caravan or an RV, we call them in the United States, and they go for weeks at a time so they can spend time with their kids. And what I found with the families in Australia that I worked with was, even when I was there for this 3-day period, if this 3-day period happened over work days for them, I saw those who were working take time off because they prioritized this coaching experience and learning that they had this opportunity to learn what they can do from me. Because I think this is the other issue that I learned. These parents are really prone to anxiety with this extensive pressure that they receive to get these diagnoses. And they know with that diagnosis, the only option they have is these alternative schools or alternative programs. And they don't want their kids to go to these programs. They want their kids to be with other kids who do talk and do read and do all the things that they are striving to be. Because remember, the parents who follow me, they understand that their kids are just late in their development because of blockages, because of physical, environmental, or mindset blockages that cause these kids to be late in development of spoken language. And because they're late talking, they're being judged to have a lot more problems mentally, cognitively, intellectually. They're being all labeled with these severe things. And this process of pointing out and labeling and identifying disability and calling it disability in order to get funding to get some kind of a help is spiraling these parents downward in anxiety. Every time they think, well, maybe that's not my kid's just late, he doesn't have this real neurological problem or this real cognitive impairment or all these things that he's being labeled with. They're just doing that to get the funding, but it still resonates with them. You accept that diagnosis when you accept that money, and then people will treat you and your child as if there is a disability going on. They're not going to look for abilities. They're not going to look for the shining brilliance that your child is trying to show, because they're too busy looking for the impairments, because more impairments makes more work and more money for these schools and therapists. As a matter of fact, they insist that these parents get on this funding because they can charge more money. And this is the same that was happening in the US 3 to 4 years ago, before they caught on, the insurance companies caught on, and they wouldn't let you charge an infinite amount to the insurance or Medicaid. It was happening with Medicaid here in the United States, or Medicare. They were just charging whatever they wanted to these things, and the systems cut them off. But in Australia, it hasn't cut off yet. They're just trying to get the bigger diagnosis, to get the bigger paycheck. And the providers can charge the bigger price tag if you've got insurance or health government, because it's not private insurance. In Australia, it's the government that's paying for it. And they just want this problem solved. So if a professional says to the government, I solved this problem, and I'll take this money, that's just all it needs, because parents are using this money to pay for whatever they can find. The issue is they just can't find things, and they just keep hearing everywhere they go, what's wrong with your child? What's their disability? What diagnosis do you have? I, in fact, dug into finding some of the things, and I couldn't even get answers about what they provide until I proved to them that I meet their criteria, that my kid has a real severe disorder, and that my kid and I have money, both through the government or private pay, to pay for this. Because without those two things, they won't even talk to you about what's potentially going on with your child. And there are things that, like I said, they're calling out and labeling just so that they can get more money. And the processes that they're developing are archaic. They're not as intuitive and development as far as the development of connection between the parent and child, because in the past few years during the pandemic, that was what was denormalized. We separated kids from social experiences so they could learn how to, keep busy on their own while parents worked, or learn from videos instead of schools, video chats or online Zoom meetings, all those things instead of humans. And so that's what happened. The disconnect was normalized, the video attraction was normalized, and now parents are not knowing how to reconnect with their children. And those who are involved in, I know Stanley Greenspan's, his platform's just putting out new stuff. My platform's putting out new stuff. The Gestalt teachers, the meaningful speech people, they're putting out new stuff, because we see in the United States what I'm seeing in the parents in Australia. They're looking for alternatives. They don't want the anxiety that comes with the diagnosis. They don't want the therapy that comes with the diagnosis, because it's old stuff that isn't working. Parents in the United States who've been through a year or two of ABA, They're not looking for those services anymore. They're looking for something else. Those parents who decided to connect with their kids during the pandemic instead of isolate them or put them on Zoom meetings, they decided to homeschool and do that themselves. Those parents are the ones that were able to send their kids back to school with skills because they themselves connected with kids. Okay. That's what happened in the United States. And it's just not seeming available to the parents in Australia. So coincidentally, I was guided to go there and provide them with experiences that did it. So let's talk about what happened, what we did. Remember, these parents are super prone to anxiety and they just wanted help. So what we did was we saw that the progress happened quickly when parents worked with me to set aside all of that stuff. Of course, they spent half a day, each one of them, talking to me about their anxiety surrounding the fact that they can't find anyone to work with them and their child who isn't judging them about the disability and instead looking for the ability of the child. They can't find anybody to do it. So they had to vent a little bit about that, kind of like I'm venting with you here today, just explaining this is the main topic of parents is not about how do I help my kid. The first thing is how frustrated and anxiety ridden they are by not finding someone who will listen to them. So then I have to get them talking with me. I have to get them sharing with me. We have to work together and show them how to work together. And this is what I did. I said, I realize all that stuff's happening, but you know that you have control over what you see and what you do here in the house. So let's start talking about that. And what the parents did was they set aside time. Like I said, the guys quit work, the women stayed home. They worked with me. They stayed with me and they talked to me about the struggles they were facing, about the fears, about their anxieties. And they talked to me about the specific things that their kids either were doing that they didn't want them to, or they're not doing yet that they're being judged for. And how they showed me how it was a picture social story or some kind of 3-step direction memorization process or something like that that was not related to their family life that these people were given to try to solve these problems. And once again, we just sort of abandoned those things and got down to basics. And what we had to do was we had to figure out where the blockage was. And in all of the kids' cases, it was a matter of not enough information. The parents knew information and they were trying to facilitate improvement without a connection from the child, without getting them to show up to the ability. They were trying to make things happen because that's what they were told to do by the people around them. You've got to structure it out, tell them what you expect, and expect it. And that didn't work for these parents because every one of these kids learned to manipulate around those expectations and they failed for the parents. So what we had to focus on is developing, starting from scratch and developing long-term habits. How do you want it to happen without you? Not how do you want to facilitate the kid through it? Because every single one of these struggles was being handled in a hand-over-hand manner. The kid wasn't brushing their teeth, so the parent was actually physically trying to do that for them, or abandoning it completely and the kid's teeth didn't get brushed. Same thing with wearing clothes. Same thing with discussions. If a child was obsessively discussing something over and over and over again, because I had verbal kids that were still stuck in struggling with social experiences and ability to maintain topic and focus and all those things that they're being judged for at school, still brilliant kids, but there were things that were driving their parents crazy, like obsessive talking and questions and questions and questions and all of these things about we're going to this and we're doing this and scripting and all of that kind of stuff was happening. And it was freaking the parents out because the kids were obsessively focused on these things, but they didn't have appropriate language. And then we started to look at what happened and how do we facilitate from the ground up. So if I hear a lot of questions coming out of the child, I listen to the parents and I hear a lot of questions coming out of the parents. If I hear a lot of doubt and frustration and I can't do it coming out of the child, I see a lot of hand over handing and forcing coming out of the parents. If I see a lot of manipulation coming from the child, I see a lack of boundaries coming from the parents. And what we did was we experienced these things. And every time I saw one of those things, a lack of boundaries, a lack of explanation, not enough information, somebody didn't consider the other person's perspective, the child was trying to distract away, whatever I saw, I just talked about with these families. And then I showed them how, starting from square one, this is why the problem is happening. Because the reality here, the other thing I learned is that late talkers and their parents, they do not want to fight. They don't want to, but they still do. Because somebody has the idea of my way or the highway, either the adult or the child. And one was not considering the other person's perspective. Either the child wasn't considering the parent or the parent wasn't considering the child. And so what I did was I worked with them on negotiation, on win-win contracts, so that things got done because the child understood the value and responsibility for that job, not just because the parents said my way or the highway. And the parents opted into being more flexible in their play and demonstration and even experiences they offered. They weren't forcing the kid to go to things they didn't want. They weren't, or avoiding going out altogether, because that's what was happening. They didn't want to fight, so they avoided. And so what I did was I got them out. I got them in the world where these problems could come up while I was there to help them understand coaching through. So what we did was we coached through things in the house, and then we coached out and about. And what happened was we found ways to calm. As soon as things got dramatic or exciting, we found ways to calm. And then we talked about it. And the reality about this is that we talked about it a lot afterwards. And the biggest thing that I learned, the biggest thing that everyone should learn from this experience that I did, is this one. And that is that everyone, even the parents of these late talkers who believe they are brilliant and they know they're great and they know they're smart and all of those things, they still underestimated. The parents underestimated, the aunties underestimated, the siblings underestimated, the professionals underestimated, the teachers underestimated. Everyone around this child underestimated their ability to understand speech and spoken language when it applies to their situation about their life. So, how I proved this to all these parents was I provided the spoken language that they were missing. I provided discussion, details, repetitive explanations of why one person is upset and the other person is triggering it. I just laid out what I saw in detailed explanations in full sentences, just like I'm using now, with very dedicated speech. And I always made sure I had those conversations, including the child in there. I said their name often. And instead of pointing out their disabilities or their struggles or what is wrong, I just showed what is different and what needs to change. So if you want compliance for the child who's refusing to do something, the very first thing you have to do is explain the value of that activity, because you know the value of that activity. Because let's say it's teeth brushing. Without teeth brushing, you have teeth falling out and bad breath and food stuck in your mouth that you always have to put your finger in, all of those reasons. Without washing your hands after the bathroom, you have poop on your hands and you had germs and you get sick, and it's not nice when you're sick. And kids who are sick often and have these issues, right? Parents know the struggles, but they're not talking about how these jobs that you're forcing your kids to do are all because you're trying to avoid the struggles of illness or dental visits or soiled clothing or bedding, all the things you're trying to avoid, that you're just manipulating around are things that you could be teaching these kids, because what happened was when we dug in and explained the details about why it was important for them to do it and how everybody felt calm, relaxed, and successful when it was win-win. It wasn't one making the other do anything, because remember, it was happening on both sides. The kids were making the parents do things and the parents were making the kids do things. And it was all a bunch of manipulation. And instead, we just turned it into win-win negotiation. And these kids could do it. And these parents doubted it. They're like, what do you mean? We can leave the strap off of him when I take him out. He'll run into the street. I'm like, no, he won't, if he understands that he's going to get squished by a car out there. And so we talked about that stuff. And that is how these parents figured out. That's how parents figured out what they need to be doing with their kids. And then when they figured it out, they did it. But what I realized that is missing. So, here I am on the Waves of Communication platform doing these videos. I've got 600 videos. I've put them in a guide. I've made workbooks. I've done all these things to help you figure out what to do. And even all these parents that I visited in Australia, they have had access to those training materials. But what was different about the experience of having me go there and being there with me was all about this number 8 that I learned, is that we need to be giving these kids more language examples of problem solving and working through the struggles that they are facing. They don't want to fight about it. They want to be seen for smart and intelligent, and they will show up to help move through these struggles, because they also want to avoid illness and injury and things like that in the future. But remember, these are kids and they don't know that these things are happening or potential to happen to them. They're just experimenting and trying to learn the best way they can. Okay. And so remember, it's everyday experiences that these parents learn from. It wasn't anything structured. I didn't take a bag of toys. I did take some bubbles and I did take some treats for things to talk about. But this is stuff that everybody can do. Every time you go visit a park for the first time, every time you take a drive to a new area, every time you visit an aquarium or any place for that matter, with your child, you have the opportunity to prep for that, to transport to that place, to navigate what's going on around there. And this is how your child will learn the natural speech they need to get out and be social and learn to talk to other people and do all of that. And so this 3-day experience that it just set up that way, that it was 5 different families that had exposure to me over 2 to 3 days, watch me interact with their child, listen to me talk about what was going on in the child's mind and in the parent's mind from an outside perspective and see what's going on. This was the component that helped these parents, that motivated them to talk more with their kids, because even though I say it every day on these videos, your kids understand far, far more than they're able to say, and they're tired and frustrated of being judged for not being able to say as much as they know. This is the life of a late talker. And by digging into the experience with them, and talking about their experience with them, using language for them to strive for. So you talk to these kids like they're going to college, because they are, not like they're gonna be late talking forever, because if you talk to them at the level they are, they'll never have anything to strive for, especially if they're put in a classroom with other kids who don't talk. Who are they learning from? Who are they getting this experience from? It's from you. So I've decided to empower you through a new level of intervention that I am going to offer you as a chance to connect with your child through a different kind of video that I'm going to be starting to create. Now, I also know I learned that these late talkers have been watching my videos along with you. If you've got a late talker in your house and you've been watching my videos on your TV or other places, I know that your late talkers are interested in hearing me talk, because Like I said, I know they understand when I talk about things from their perspective and having to not force them to do things and having to work out win-win negotiations and all of that. They listen and they understand, and they're hoping that you are also listening to me. So, what I want to do is I want to give you some opportunities to listen to me talk about topics that are important to every family together. And so, this is what it's going to be. It's a new video series here on the Waves of Communication channel. It's just going to be a very special playlist that I'm going to be putting out videos there. The topics are going to be Marcy's talking about toothbrushing. Marcy's talking about fear. Marcy's talking about making contracts. Marcy's talking about toothbrushing, all those things, hand washing, wearing clothes, the good, the bad, and the ugly that happen in everyday life. And I'm going to be talking about it from the perspective of a language facilitator, the same way I talked in these families' houses. That I got cheeky little looks from kids. I got eye contact better than anybody ever gets with these kids because they appreciated the fact that I was talking to them at the level of intelligence that they possess. And their parents began to start talking to them with that same level of intelligence, and they improved as well. So this is my mission, is when I put these videos out that you watch them together with your child. And if you're going to choose something to put in front of them instead of big, bigger, biggest, or ABCs or things like that, maybe Miss Marcy talking about whatever's going on around us could be the language models that will inspire both you and your late talker to pick up these Gestalt phrases I'm going to use and practice them in your own life. So stay tuned to the channel so that you can have access to all of those videos. They're not going to be in the membership. It's going to be a trial at first to see how people go. And if it turns out to be so many, maybe it'll be its own course. And then there's more travel coming. So there's going to be this 3-day coaching experience that parents are going to be able to experience whenever I travel. And my next destination is Dubai. So if you are a family in Dubai, for the last 2 weeks of January and the first week of February, I'm going to be in Dubai, potentially offering the opportunity to do in-person coaching experiences with your family. And potentially, I'm going to be traveling other places too. Now, if you don't live in Dubai or the United States or Florida area or anywhere like that, you can work with me to learn how to analyze your own situation. And what you do is you will send me videos of those situations that you want changed. I will explain to you how to see this from everyone's perspective, how to talk about the why, and then you can move forward with your own plan and moving through it, creating your own 3-day experience so that you can facilitate those strategies that you learn. It's all available on my website, wavesofcommunication.com. And then what you'll be able to do is join these parents in Australia in feeling like you're equipped and empowered. You can decrease this anxiety of, I don't know what to do, I don't know why, because you'll be starting these new strategies that are ground up teaching that it creates independence, right? Because we're not forcing kids to do things with better compliance. We're motivating them to do things with independence, including using speech to talk about their problems, their worries, their frustrations, because we know they're feeling them, those anxieties going around. The other thing that I noticed in Australia is that siblings are highly, highly affected. I've always known this, but I definitely saw it in Australia. Siblings are highly affected by their parents' distractions, both distractions by trying to force their siblings to do things or being frustrated because their siblings won't comply, or spending too much time researching and taking their kids to appointments and schlepping to this therapy or giving them this medicine or forcing them to do this or that or the other thing because they're all band-aids and things that they're trying to put on solving these problems. And so the reality is language facilitation helps you solve these problems because it facilitates independence, not compliance. And it facilitates motivation to continue to develop that's intrinsic in the child. Because when they start talking and they get good reactions to their speech, they keep doing it and they try harder. And it does not take months or years to see new speech. In fact, days, only days, within 1 week. These parents were seeing new behaviors, new compliance, and new spoken language, such as it's serious about brushing teeth and all the things that are going on. And you will be amazed at what you can facilitate. So I encourage you to take advantage of the resources that I have available. The website's been redesigned so you can find everything you need easily, but just find the way that you learn best. And I hope to work with you soon in the future. Until the next episode, thank you for joining me, everybody, and get out there and connect with your late talker. That's what's needed. Have a good one and happy Thanksgiving. Bye for now.